I'd like to begin, of course, by thanking the Institute for this opportunity. This is too loud for me, how's that? To give a few introductory remarks about Wolfgang and the work we've done together. It's a daunting challenge to encapsulate over 20 years of close collaboration and friendship in a few moments, but well worth the experience of trying to pull it all together. As in most significant relationships, Wolfgang and I have our own origin story. We can remember the place and event when we first met. Wolfgang can even remember the date. How does, you might ask, an immigrant from Germany living on the west side of Vancouver Island meet up with the son of immigrants from England living in southern Ontario? Every Canadian knows the answer: somewhere in between. We met at an injured workers meeting held in the public library in Thunder Bay, where Wolfgang was showing his recently completed documentary, Every 12 Seconds, the title being the frequency with which workers were being injured at work at the time, and I was there representing the Steelworkers Union. The meeting was hosted by the Thunder Bay and District Injured Workers Group. Only in Canada, you say. Pity. In this are embedded two elements of our background that you need to understand in order to follow the rest. Firstly, although Wolfgang and I have a strong friendship because of common principles, a love of red wine, and a sardonic sense of humor, I was there in Thunder Bay as a representative of the United Steelworkers Union, which from its locals in workplaces and communities all over the country to its staff and elected officers promoted the rights of injured workers, representing them in individual cases, developing strategies to improve their treatment and reduce the incidence of injuries and illness at work. I was there and I'm here because of the leadership of my union, and in particular I want to recognize Ken Newman, my national director and co-chair of the National Institute for Disability Management and Research and of the Pacific Coast University for Workplace Health Sciences. Few leaders have made the personal commitment to improve the lives of disabled workers. Ken Newman is one of them. There are many good reasons why he really should be here speaking to you about his role with Wolfgang. I want to thank him for the privilege of being able to give you these remarks. Secondly, while Wolfgang is exceptional in many ways, as you will hear, he was not in Thunder Bay alone, and he is not alone today. Wolfgang is a leader in a broad movement of injured workers and people with disabilities organizations, of union activists, advocates, and researchers who have been part of the history of workers' compensation in this country since the late 1800s. It has been his role to expand the movement's links with business and government leaders into national networks around the globe. Indeed, Wolfgang's personal experience of newly arrived immigrant to injured worker to activist to executive director and now university president reflects the evolution of the roles and strategies taken by members of this movement over the past 30 years or more. By this I mean, since the historic compromise of the last century, injured workers have not only protested, lobbied, and litigated. They have studied, researched, and developed alternatives. They have collaborated with unions, researchers, governments, employers, and others with the goal to improve health and safety at work and protect injured workers from poverty and suffering. This is not an ask that someone else do it for them. It is a demand that it be done with their full participation. Nothing about us without us, as it is said by many in the movement, or as Wolfgang would say, up close and personal. It is his commitment to being up close and personal that has been a touchstone of our relationship over the years. For me, it means that while Wolfgang expects to be consulted, he also expects to be heard. That actions will be taken that actually do result in improvements for workers as a result of his efforts. It's not enough to say nice things, to repeat generic principles, and continue with business as usual. That incredible force of will that Wolfgang is famous for is matched by an equally voracious demand to demonstrate actual advances on behalf of the lives of injured workers and workers with a disability. It is a trait that he shares with many other leaders in the movement. There is a third element, though, I should mention that's very important, It's very evident here today, just in the makeup of the speakers that are speaking to you and of the diversity of the people in this room who, as Cam mentioned, recognize each other. And that is, it is evident that Wolfgang is able to build, excuse me, he has been able to build this incredible network of supporters from a very diverse backgrounds with what are often conflicting interests. But he's able to bring them together both through the strength of his will, but also by a commitment that everybody shares, a strong relationship that is built between people, and a belief that we can improve things for injured workers as well as the bottom line. His approach has been straightforward with two key components. He has forged a balanced table of these key representatives I just referred to participate in his projects and on his boards from the many interested parties involved, always chaired by representatives of the central parties, management and labor, and also always including workers with a disability. Secondly, the common theme in all his work is about changing practice, using evidence, research, and experience to build an array of supports. When I first heard of Wolfgang, he had faced down British Columbia's biggest employer at the time, Macmillan Bloedel, who had attempted to rid itself of all its troublesome injured workers that they had employed, including Wolfgang. By the time Wolfgang and his allies were finished, MacBlo had reversed their policies, made a contribution to the video, I believe, and I think became a founding member of NIDMAR. Since NIDMAR was founded, one can easily track the evolution of Wolfgang's career by the succession of projects, all designed to engage that balanced table and produce something that would be useful to improving outcomes for workers. In the early years, many of those projects had to do with training and the beginning of the development of reliable standards. The Code of Practice is one example in which I played a role along with Wolfgang, Joyce Gravel, Mike Carlton, and others, all under the guidance of this balanced table. Again, I will leave the dates to Wolfgang, but we're talking mostly about the 1990s. We saw the Code of Practice as a framework that would address key practice challenges in return to work and in hiring workers with a disability. It would lay out the role of the key players: government, workers, employers, service providers, medical services, insurers, and government boards could play. It would describe a fair and balanced process. I think of it as a codification of good practice, mapping out what needs to be done, by whom, and when. The political process by which this project became a well-received guiding document of the International Labour Organization, known as the ILO, is a fascinating tale in itself about which I know relatively little, so unfortunately I can't tell you that part. Wolfgang was it was really Wolfgang's brainchild. I remember the early discussions at the board. I remember his engagement with the international community and his ability to engage the board members. I was a board member at that time, to assist him to obtain support for the key players. For example, to forge key alliances with the central parties of the ILO, which is a tripartite body requiring agreement of government, business, and labor. Wolfgang met with the international representatives of our federal government, of our organizations of employers, and of workers. The development process, which I was much more centrally involved in, was also interesting. It was linked to an ILO project for which Wolfgang was a key advisor. My involvement began with a NIDMAR project to create a Canadian Code of Practice that was based on the strength of evidence, research, and experience. It involved an extensive review of research literature and input from a small committee of practitioners drawn from the different participants, including injured workers. The Canadian edition has gone through, I believe, 2 editions. This then, in turn, became the basis of a draft ILO guide, which was received by the ILO, modified, and then reviewed by a committee of experts drawn from management, labor, and government from 22 countries. The result was the publication in 2001 of the Code of Practice in Managing Disability in the Workplace. Now, some of you may be wondering what's so significant about this, and others may be saying, why have I never heard about this before? I think part of this reflects the changes that have occurred in the world and were occurring at that time. The ILO has always had a historic role of creating these standards for international behavior and has broadly influenced many countries in the way in which they develop their laws. At the time in Ontario, however, in the late 1990s, when the government was taking the most divisive positions against injured workers ever experienced in this province, I thought that creating an evidence-based, fair, and pragmatic system would create some potential for help, at least on the return to work and management side. As it turned out, I was wrong. When the government is the cause of the bias in the system, it undermines what even people of goodwill can accomplish. On the other hand, the code has been found useful in many applications and countries. It forms the basis of a number of standards. It has been translated into 35 languages. I would argue it still provides a valid map of how to provide employment while not stigmatizing injured workers and workers with a disability. Since the code, Wolfgang's taken on other projects to support those who want to make a difference. There are now many online training programs developed with similar methods, employment standards for return to work, audit tools, and of course, the university. Wolfgang can never be accused of being modest in his goals or in his accomplishments. Equally good to see is that with regards to the board and board of directors, it's interesting to see the transitions and changes that are occurring there as well. This is the board of directors of the University and of NINMAR, which supports Wolfgang's work, reflecting the key ability to change and keep up what is going on around you. If you just look at the up-to-date listing of who the board members are, you see, again, how important the networks are that Wolfgang has been able to build. Wolfgang has also never been one to hang on to what was accomplished yesterday when there's work to be done today. For me, I think Wolfgang's work stands out for its unrelenting commitment to forge practice that would result in concrete improvements for workers in a way that are pragmatic and supportive of good practice. Good practice in unions, good practice in business, good practice in government, and in that regard, his work provides a mirror for us all. Now, it would be wrong for me to make this point now in this place and at this time without noting how far we have drifted from these goals and what is currently being done by workers' compensation boards across this country, and including in Ontario. The shift that began here in 1995 and accelerated since 2008 still makes all policy ultimately subject to the value for money, cost-cutting, and restricting benefits for workers. On the other hand, it would not do proper service for the importance of Wolfgang's work if I were not also to urge there is in Ontario, and I would argue elsewhere, but we're in Ontario, the opportunity to do better. The old WCB did value research on how to improve coverage and support for injured workers. There is a long public track record that shows it. There are provisions in the Act that seem to require it. I think it's the duty of all of us who believe that policy should be based on evidence, research, and experience, take a stand and continue to challenge and propose alternatives. And while we may object to the setbacks we face, many of the institutions supporting Wolfgang's agenda continue on. Improvement is possible given how much we already know about what could be done better. We need to forge new common ground on the continued expansion of both employment and consumer rights for workers with a disability. The coming into force of the employment requirements of the Access for Ontarians with Disability Act raises important opportunities. But there I go, thinking like Wolfgang, thinking big, going on about new possibilities. So maybe things do not look so good here, so we should push over here or there and do this and do that. Forging agreements every step of the way with people to try and do better. His dedication, productivity, and enthusiasm continues to both amaze me and, quite frankly, it's contagious. Thank you. If I may.